Welcome to the Willow Kids podcast, a space where curiosity is nurtured, creativity is encouraged, and learning is treated as a lifelong adventure. At Willow Kids, we believe children thrive when education goes beyond memorization, when it invites wonder, builds confidence, and honors each child's unique rhythm of growth. In this podcast, we explore how kids learn best, hear from inspiring educators and parents, and share ideas that support thoughtful, joyful learning in academics, the arts, and life. Whether you're a parent, educator, or lifelong learner, we're glad you're here. Let's grow strong minds and kind hearts together. Before we begin, we also have an announcement. We're excited to share that Willow Kids is officially launching its tutoring pilot program in Calabasas, California. This pilot is designed for families who want something more thoughtful and personalized than traditional tutoring, an approach that supports academic growth while nurturing curiosity, confidence, and a genuine love of learning. If you're a parent in or around the Calabasas area and are interested in learning more, we invite you to visit www.willow.kids to explore the program, see what we're building, and sign up for updates. Spots for the pilot are limited, and we're excited to grow this community together from the ground up. Visit www.willow.kids, and thank you for being a part of the Willow Kids journey. All right. Hi, my name is Erin Harrigan. I'm an early childhood and elementary specialist with some extensive training and experience in communications. And today I have with me Jennie Egan.
Hi, Erin. Good morning.
Good morning. So today I wanted to talk about technology in a world where children have more and more access to growing technology, and parents have a lot of questions and mixed feelings and mixed knowledge. Perhaps have, kid filters, which is great, but it's kind of hard to know what kids are really absorbing through their screens. So I want to know, why does screen engagement look so much like learning, even when deeper learning may not actually be happening?
That's a great question, Erin. So when kids are on screens, their attention is being held. The screen is designed to grab them through quick visuals, sounds, and lots of feedback. But just because a kid has their attention grabbed by a screen, it doesn't mean that learning is actually happening. Because so much of learning emotional engagement, back and forth exchange, trial and error, and the relationships that they have with the people they engage with.
So this is stating that screens can improve education and learning. However, too much time spent in front of a screen and multitasking with other media has been related to worse executive functioning and academic performance. And as screen time reduces the amount of quality of interactions between children and their caregivers, it can also have an impact on language development. What are your thoughts on that?
Thank you for sharing that, Erin. That makes a lot of sense because screens can certainly be a way of communicating content to kids. And that's a lot of the screen usage that we see happening in classrooms. So screens, they have a place, right? But when it comes to really integrating what children learn, so much of that happens with their relationships and their interactions with the people around them, whether that's through their peers or their caregivers. So while screens do have a place, there needs to be a human component as well. So an example of a way that we can use screens with kids is showing them content and following that up with a conversation about what they saw.
Love that. Something that I've noticed through my observations with children in the classroom, there was a time where the school that I was working at introduced tablets into our stations. And one thing that I noticed was increased frustration and behavior challenges when it was to put that screen away, right? So why can a child seem calm and focused while on a screen while missing important emotional or developmental experiences?
When we are on screens, things are being kind of spoon-fed to us. It's pleasurable watching a screen, and it's stimulating watching a screen. So when that screen goes away, real life can feel lacking, and it can actually feel understimulating. So I've seen that too. It can lead to some meltdowns afterward. It can lead to feelings of boredom after the screen's taken away. And when we overuse screens, we're taking away opportunities where children can be engaging in some kind of active play or complex problem solving that requires a level of frustration that isn't present when they're on the screens. So if you think about time where the kid's in front of the screen, where they could be engaging in something where they have to sit with a level of frustration or a level of boredom. We're taking away those opportunities when it's overdone, and that muscle isn't being built.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of some of the very simple games that I see on my nephew's tablet that he can just select anything. And it's so simple that he doesn't go through some of the frustration. I think back to even when I was a child and screens were not a huge part of our society, but they were becoming that way. And you really had to work through levels on video games or things like that. And it just seems like a lot of the games that appear to be geared toward children are just there to kind of keep you, like you said, like kind of complacent and calm and just busy.
Right. I see it too. And I don't want to convey, I want to be real about this. I'm a parent and I've used screens, I use screens, and I've overused screens. And so I think this is something that we all do. So, number one, coming to this conversation from a place of like, we're all in this together. This is something that we're all learning how to navigate. But yeah, I mean, with my own son, some of the games that he loves to play are very simple and very rewarding because he's is good at it. So he keeps getting it right, keeps getting it right, and he keeps getting that positive reward of moving on to the next level. And that feels so good. But there's a disconnect when he's asked to do something that doesn't have that ease and that positive response that's so continuous. By allowing our kids to engage in that way, we're not setting them up for success in more challenging situations and building resilience.
Yeah, that's a good point. That also kind of reminds me of process praise and how you want to really praise a child's efforts and things where it seems like the games or the apps or even maybe the shows that children might be consuming are giving less praise for the struggle and more praise for just like getting through each stage or episode or what have you.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And I think that even some of the most effective, like educational games or platforms where a child can really like drill a skill, they don't offer any type of "I see you trying." That engagement with a person can. Either your answer is right or it's wrong, and you get that reward when it's right, but there's no acknowledgement of effort.
Thank you. So I think we kind of started to touch on this a little bit, but I kind of want to come back to, so why do some children show more frustration, shorter patience, or lower confidence after long periods of screen time?
Well, research has come out that's drawn some impact between screen usage and number one, sleep quality. So we're all impacted by diminished sleep quality. We're more irritable, we're less able to learn, less able to focus, but some people are more sensitive to that. Likewise, research has come out that speaks to behavioral patterns that result from excessive screen time. So, limited ability to focus, increased frustration, less impulse control. And again, individuals are just a spectrum of sensitivity to those things.
One thing I want to look more into also is even just the effects on brain chemistry. I know I've read some early studies about how, short videos or short games kind of give your brain like a little dopamine hit. So these children are maybe getting used to getting this hit of dopamine every 10 seconds or so. And it's just like constant. And so they're really engaged because the brain wants that dopamine. It feeds on new experiences. So it's like about every 10 seconds, there's a new video or there's a new reward or you've already completed the level. And so then maybe I'm wondering if some of that frustration comes from now you're in the real world and you're not getting that constant chemical input from the world that you are from the screen.
Absolutely, Erin. I think that makes complete sense. By comparison, real life becomes dull.
What early signs suggest that screen time may be replacing connection rather than supporting growth?
So, if you see that your child is initiating shared play and shared activities that they maybe previously enjoyed, that's something you might want to look at. Is the screen becoming the favorite toy? rather than you as the caregiver or siblings. Increased irritability after screen use. Are you seeing lots of meltdowns consistently after the screen is taken away? Another thing that I've noticed as a parent more so is more difficulty with independent play. When I allow my son to engage with more screen time, it's harder to get him started on Legos or building or playing with his Hot Wheels. More calling for the adults and more requests for the screen. One last thing is reduced imaginative play because that's something that screens can steal is creativity. You know, when you're consuming someone else's ideas, you don't have the opportunity to play and create your own world, which is such an important part of childhood.
I think that's such an interesting point because I think children often have this experience of being bored, right? You hear it all the time. I'm bored. I'm bored. I remember saying that all the time as a child.
Yeah.
And I remember, the adults in my life, my mom telling me, well, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? Why don't you do that? But it was really in the moments where everyone was out of ideas that I would sit and really imagine and create. And I see that in my students as well when, they're saying, I'm bored, rather than giving them something to do. I think maybe we kind of have this like innate want to help our children and to help fix discomfort, and boredom is part of that discomfort. And so then well, here's this, shiny thing that entertains. But when that's not an option, then I think you made a really good point about having the opportunity to use imagination in your play.
Absolutely. I remember it too. You know, boredom for a child, boredom feels so miserable, but it's needed. You know, that's when we come up with our best ideas.
Yeah, I love that. So, what does face to face interaction give children that screens, even educational ones, can't fully replace?
I think that emotional attunement is so being aware of other people's emotions, being aware of your own emotions, being able to process them and do something with that. It really comes from our interactions with other people. And that's such a skill that children need to build. Shared attention and bonding, being involved in something with another person is so important for kids. Real time feedback, repair after a misunderstanding or something going wrong with another person. That's how kids learn how to negotiate and navigate relationships. It's through practice. Again, I see you trying, someone validating their process, not just the product, like you mentioned before. Adaptive problem solving, complex communication, emotional thinking, being able to take someone else's perspective and creativity, which we spoke about.
Yeah, I want to touch back on this study as well. And it's stating that higher screen time at the age of 4 is associated with lower levels of emotional understanding at the age of 6 years. And it also reveals that having a television in a child's bedroom at the age of 6 years predicts lower levels of emotional understanding at 8 years. So I feel like this is such important information. I think, I never ever want to shame any parent because it's hard. And I think that there's absolutely a time and a place for screens. I think, of all the times that I see especially young children sitting in a restaurant with a tablet or in the shopping cart with a tablet. And I wonder, how much they're missing when they're so focused on screen as opposed to observing how their parents are interacting with one another or how other guests at the restaurant are interacting or being able to interact with the waitress and things like that. So do you think that that's something that can be approved?
Absolutely. There's so much modeling that the people around young children do for them on a daily basis. And when their world becomes so small and it's just the screen, that's being taken away. While the creatives that create the content that our kids are watching, they do a lot to try to make characters dynamic. It is flat compared to real life because real life, it isn't clean, it isn't perfect. There's so much nuance that a child can't receive from a screen. Additionally, when we're talking about the impulse to put a screen in front of our children when we're doing something and they're probably going to be bored. I've had a lot of meltdowns at the grocery store I've had a lot of embarrassing moments in restaurants with my son. And unfortunately, the growth is messy and the growth is ugly and uncomfortable. And I wish that we lived in a society that was more forgiving towards parents and misbehaving children in public, because it's through that misbehavior that children grow. There's a pressure to when you bring your child into a public space for them to be so compliant, so quiet, and so well behaved. And a screen can make them do that, but it's not building any real muscle. It's not building tolerance for boredom. It's not building tolerance for a non-preferred activity. My son hates going to the grocery store, but non-preferred activities are part of life. And as teachers, we've seen kids that sometimes outright refuse to engage in non-preferred activities. Now, of course, there's a number of reasons why children do that. I'm not saying that it's caused by a parent putting a screen in front of them. There's tons of reasons why kids don't want to engage in preferred activities. But I'm just going to speak for myself. I know that I have fallen into the trap of wanting to make my child compliant because there's a way that we behave in public, and the screen's going to make you do that, and taking away opportunities for him to grow in his ability to be bored, to be frustrated, to not get his way. But it's all tough. It's all hard. And sometimes you're just done. Sometimes, as the adult, you've had a long day and it's what you got to do. So, and there's a place for that. But for myself, it's just looking at, is this becoming a habit? Because when it becomes a habit, that's when real opportunities being taken from my child to build that uncomfortable muscle.
I think that's really key. Is it becoming a habit? Excuse me. Because, like you said, I think something that's very difficult for parents and educators to manage is that burnout. So, I never want to, like I said, I never want to shame a parent out of necessity. And is it becoming a habit? I think is definitely key. And I think I also want to touch back on, you saying you wish that it was a little bit more of a forgiving environment. And I completely agree. I think it, goes back to the old quote, it takes a village. And that's not always your close friends and families. Sometimes that's the community just having some understanding and empathy. But going along with that, I think if there was one thing that I wanted to say to parents, it would be to just give that compassion to yourself. And even if someone's giving, some kind of judgmental look or under the breath comment, it's unfortunately part of the package, and your child is allowed to be frustrated, just like the same way that we're allowed to be frustrated. And it's okay that that's uncomfortable too. So I hope that parents can also learn to give themselves grace, because that is a really challenging thing when you have a child that's throwing a tantrum in the middle of the grocery store. That's tough. And to give yourself that grace through that period, I think is really, really important, because parents deserve it. It's the hardest job in the world.
I love and how you mentioned sometimes it's, that village, it's not even someone you know. I remember being in Trader Joe's and my son just taking it to another level. There was a woman was watching, and I could see on her face, the I think there were so many thoughts that went through her head. But what she ended up saying to me was, "You're doing a good job." I was mortified, but that meant so much, because our kids go through phases where it's hard, where it's like the behavior may be constant until they have that breakthrough, until you go through it with them. You go through the mess with them, and then they now have enough muscle to engage in that non-preferred activity and be bored and not get what they want and act better. But it meant so much to me, and it let me just breathe easier. And it shaded the way that I interacted with my kid after that, because that feeling of embarrassment, it is really a huge motivator, and it can cause us to have less patience with our kids, less grace with our kids. So I would just love it if we lived in a world where strangers were part of our village.
Yeah. And hopefully we can keep working toward that. I kind of going back to, talking about when to use the screen and when not to. I have this friend who she fears that she's like a quote unquote bad mom whenever she lets her daughter watch a movie. Like sometimes she'll even call or text me like, "Am I a bad mom? I let my daughter do this. I let my daughter watch this. Am I a bad mom?" And I'm, constantly like, "No, you're not a bad mom for that. You're not a bad mom." But, I do want to know, what does healthy, developmentally supportive screen use actually look like in everyday family life? How can families use that to support them?
Well, that the mom guilt is so real, and it's so real and it's so intense. And if you're getting up every day and you're doing it, you're a good mom. So now, what healthy screen time can look like is having clear boundaries. Because it's fun to watch a screen. Children would pretty much do it without limit if a limit's not imposed on them. So it is our job to put limits to it. Establish a routine when it comes to screen time. Maybe for an older child, that looks like you get an hour of television after all your homework is done, after chores are done, after we as a family have spent some time together. Everyone's home routine is different, but for myself, I really try not to use screens at all during mealtime. So that's me being conscious of, am I checking my phone? And then pretty much as a rule for my child to not be on the screen, just because meal times are so important and they're such a source of bonding and health for kids. I think as a rule, when it's not replacing sleep, play, or rituals, and that's going to look different for everyone. If screens can be shared. So we are watching a movie together, family movie night. We are watching something educational that we can then build on, whether that building is a conversation or a project. Uh, If it's something that sparks conversation afterward, that's always a great sign. And we also need to think about our own children's specific sensory sensitivities. There are some kids that have a much lower tolerance for screens. So, what may be okay for one child, where you let them watch extended screen time, you set your boundary and your limit, and they're able to walk away pretty much well regulated, that may not apply to another kid. So, a lot of this really has to be evaluated based on your knowledge of the child.
That's so true. It's like every child is their own person, and just because you got it down with one, doesn't mean you have it down with the next. It's like being a new parent to each child, right? I think, yeah, I've thought about that as well. Like the screen sharing, like watching a movie together or doing something together, I think is so important. And to add to that too, I think, holding oneself accountable without beating yourself up, without the mom guilt, but being accountable to, check, is this becoming a habit? How frequently are we doing this? Is this benefiting my child? And really like monitor what children are doing. I think, especially in today's world, there are so many apps that have parental controls and settings. And so parents may just rely on those to kind of be the parent. But to me, it doesn't seem like a one size fits all, kind of how you said, some children are okay with certain things and others aren't. This is like, it's kind of just it seems to me like a blanket tool that, maybe it's filtering out explicit language or explicit content. But that doesn't mean that the content is specifically suited for a young developing brain. I think that there are a lot of content creators that are geared toward children, and some of them are amazing and fabulous and awesome. And some of them are just geared toward getting engagement from the
Mhm.
viewer rather than truly, helping. So I think as a parent, being really involved and knowing whether that's sitting with your child, or if you can't do it in the moment, at least going back through and, looking at the history of what was being consumed when they're using that media. I think that's really, really important. And then going back and asking questions. What did you think about that? What did that feel like? What happened here?
Absolutely. In my home, I use YouTube because I love the calming atmospheres. Sometimes I'll have that on in the background, but I hate it for my kid because so much of the content geared towards children is not what I want my son watching, but the very things that we don't want them watching, they love. That's the thing that they're gonna grab. So YouTube is, I don't think that the algorithm that censors out what's not appropriate for kids is developed enough. I kind of try to stay away from there's specific things I'll let him watch on YouTube, but you can start on one video and it can take you somewhere so far away. So I think that when you're in a situation where maybe it's not time for independent play, it is time for some screen time, and I can't be in the room with you. Maybe I need to clean the house. Maybe I need to cook, whatever. Maybe I need to take a work call, whatever it is, I can't supervise. I tend to use something other than YouTube just because it can take you down such a different place.
I've seen it, absolutely. And again, it may be child appropriate, but it doesn't replace being the parent, right? And just making those decisions on what your values are and what you think is productive.
Right. Because it's going to grab them. It's going to grab their attention. And to a young mind, that's what's going to decide whether I click it or not.
So going back, we talked a little bit about seeing children in, restaurants, things like that. Where in a busy family's day, meals, car rides, transitions, do screens most often take the place of conversation or shared time?
We talked about meals. I think meals are huge. And when I was thinking about this question, the first thing I asked myself is where are these opportunities where my child could be bored? And I'm just wanting to appease that boredom. Where are moments where I might want just quiet as the adult? So I thought of car rides, waiting periods, and morning routines. So moments where two people could be engaged in just shared quiet. We're filling it with screens. So I know as an adult, sometimes I crave quiet, but then there are other times when I'm uncomfortable with quiet and I want to fill that quiet. And I think that's because not to the degree that our kids are growing up with it today, but parents today, we grew up with screens. We grew up with constant noise. And sometimes that can feel really comforting, but not healthy. So, times when you might be engaged in shared quietness with your child. That's where we're filling in some unnecessary screen time. Another one is decompression. So, when we decompress after work, children decompress after school. They've had to hold it together, they've had to be on their best behavior and perform all day. So, adults, sometimes we like to just scroll to decompress after work. They might want to scroll. They might want to watch a screen. They might want to play a video game. That's another opportunity for kids to regulate their emotions in a different way without using that tool. Bedtime is another big one. I know as a parent, I've gone through my own struggles with bedtime. That's another skill that has to be developed, being able to fall asleep. Uh, Sometimes, a child in front of a screen may become so overstimulated and sort of just max out and then ease into sleep, but that becomes a crutch. And it's an opportunity to build the skill of regulating your nervous system to the point where you can fall asleep that we're sometimes taking away. So I would say, think about, is this an opportunity for my child to be bored? Is this an opportunity for us to just be quiet together where I'm leaning on the screen?
Yeah, I think that's a great point also. I'm thinking about, I took my nephew to Disneyland recently, and for us,
You're brave.
it was a big day. But, it was at the time that we left, there was a lot of traffic, and it was about an hour and 45-minute drive for us. And, my cousin did not send his tablet with him. He asked in the beginning, "Can I use your phone for the ride?" And I was like, "No, we're just going to get through it. It's going to go pretty quick." Kind of just hoping that it wouldn't be so bad. But we had some of the most fantastic conversation where I think, when you're using the tablet to just kind of keep the calm and the quiet, it is taking place of conversation. And, even looking back to my own developing years, some of the best conversations that I had with my parents were in the car ride where we talked about, really important things that happen in my school day. And sometimes not, sometimes there's that conversation. What did you do at school? Oh, nothing. But I think having the quiet leads to the opportunity. At least the door is open to have conversations. And
Absolutely.
it can be really meaningful. Another thing you said that really like sparked me too is even thinking of my own boredom. And I don't often have small children with me in my personal life, but I think about, if I'm at the dentist in the waiting room, I'm often on my phone. Or when periods of waiting, I do takes a conscious effort to not scroll on the phone or to not find a little game or something like that. And I think if possible, when possible, to like model that not being on the screen, I think is really key because modeling is so important for children, to see what is the adult in my life doing? What did they rely on? So if you're able to kind of be at peace with some of that awkward quietness or use that quiet time to spark a conversation, then I think that that will go a long way with children as well.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you brought that up, Erin, because I've been seeing more research coming out stating that even potentially more than your child's relationship to the screen, your relationship to your screen plays a huge impact on our kids. And because we grew up with screens, and quite honestly, we're all kind of addicted to our screens. I mean, I know I am. I'll speak for myself. I think it's become a social norm. I think it's something that we as a society have become really comfortable with. And it does play a huge role on our kids. Not only are we modeling behavior to them, we're showing them that, this excessive screen time, it's okay. The adults do it, but we are also showing what we prioritize. We're showing how we regulate ourselves. I know that I decompress by scrolling. There are times when I catch myself, and I think we're at a place where it has to be intentional because it's happening all around us, and everything in our world is telling us that this is normal, this is okay. So I know I at least have to stop myself from doing it.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. It's definitely a process. And yeah, I mean our generation, like you said, has grown up with screens. So it's kind of like an unlearning of some behaviors so that we can set children up for something a little bit more protective. So sometimes when we're talking about screen time and technology, it feels like a lot of like, no, don't do this, don't do that. You're doing that wrong. You can't do this. How can parents create some small screen boundaries that feel more supportive rather than restrictive?
Absolutely. So the way that I have, because I've done both, I've definitely been very reactive and restrictive, but what tends for me tends to work better is having predictable routines. So I asked myself, are we at a place where my child expects to be having some screen time every day? You know, and if I have gotten to that place, then I do need to do some work to establish a new norm. So is the routine screens after homework? Is the routine screens after your chore? Does my son know how much screen time he's going to be allowed, or is it a surprise when I'm suddenly pulling the plug on it? So, number one, predictable routines. Transition warnings are huge. So, the same kind of warning that you might give your kid before the end of a play date or before the end of a park trip can also be given when you're nearing the end of screen time. A quick reminder that after this episode, we're turning the screen off can be really, really helpful. Also, offering alternatives. So I had to transition into when I was, because I did go through a period where I was relying too much on screens. And I had to really build my child's muscle of being able to play independently. And Legos have been building activities have been huge, 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 huge. So at the beginning, I did have to ease him into that. So what that looked like for me was first engaging in the play with him. So maybe 10 minutes of we're engaged together in this play that the goal is that it's going to be done independently as an alternative to that screen time. And then easing them into over the course of a few weeks, that being an activity that you can just direct them to without having to get them started with it.
I love that you talked about, scheduling as being the first step and like how you're setting up your time and your child's time. I think that that's something that might be kind of overlooked at times because it's just, we're in life and we're busy and we're moving from point A to point B to point C. But when you're really, when you have a moment to think about the week ahead of you or the days ahead of you, and really kind of almost even like schedule in time for downtime. I think that's so vital.
Absolutely. Really being, I know that I've had to really be intentional about what our time at home looks like. And I think of independent play as tool that I have because there's always going to be moments where you need to do something undisturbed as a parent, like a work call, making a meal, whatever it is that you need to do. You need to have a toolbox of things that you can direct your child to so that they can engage in something that's healthy for them, that's stimulating for them while you get done what you need to get done because real life requires that.
I'm thinking too about how you're talking about how Legos are like so big for you with your family. And I think also something that's important that's really, really hard as a parent and as an educator is allowing kids to do things that might be kind of messy. I feel like Legos is kind of this middle ground, right? Because there's a lot of little pieces, but it's not too bad to clean up. But I'm thinking, to some co-teachers that I've had in the past that would even keep certain materials put away because they didn't want to deal with the cleanup afterwards. But some of those like creations were like the most stimulating for children. It's also a learning opportunity and a social process to teach children how to clean up and so that they can engage in these creative things. And, it's not going to be perfect. They're not, especially if they're very young, they're not going to clean up perfectly. But I think that's a stress on it's an added thing to have to clean up. But when you can maybe schedule ahead to have some of those times, I think that that's a great replacement to give kids opportunities to be off of their screens and really engage in the world.
Absolutely. I love that you said that because there have been so many times when I've had to remind myself that the entire process, so the preparation of the activity, doing the activity, the cleanup of the activity, they're all skills that kids need to practice. As adults, we think of everything just because we are able to do things without really thinking about it. I know I have to sometimes remind myself that, oh, this young child, they have to practice cleaning up. They have to practice setting something up. And there's so much value in that as well. So I love that you mentioned that.
Thank you. I want to just kind of drive this home too with another quote from this study. Yes. So it gives some suggestions. So the CDC and other organizations have these guidelines that let's see, screen time limits for like different age groups. So they're suggesting about half an hour to 1 hour a day for 3 to 7 year olds, 1 hour for 7 to 12 year olds, 1.5 hours for 12 to 15 year olds, and 2 hours for 16 year olds or older. And in thinking of that, when you can have screen time, I always want to think about how can the screen time really be productive. And one thing that I did in my classroom was my school studied through children's passions. They had, their deep interests that we would delve into, and it was kind of like, some parents were okay with any amount of screen time. Some were like, my kid doesn't have any screen time. So when we use screen time, for me, I really wanted it to be intentional. So it was like, let's look at this National Geographic. You love cheetahs. Let's look at this National Geographic about cheetahs, and trying to, not always need to replace the screen. I think we live in a world where it's a part of our life and it's a very useful tool. In all honesty, as well. We talk a lot about restricting it, and in a lot of cases, there are, I think, ways to use it productively. And I think also as educators and parents, sometimes we feel like it's our job to like know everything, but there are some great opportunities to say, I actually don't know about that. Let's research it and kind of use the screen in a productive way as well. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I want to say that your class sounds so much fun. And I completely agree. Sometimes my son and like, he'll ask me something and I'll not know, and we'll go on ChatGPT together and we'll find out. So technology is a great resource for research. And when you're engaged with your child in research, not only are you modeling that it's okay not to know something, adults are lifelong learners too. Learning is fun. Learning is a way that we bond. All those things are fantastic. So I love that use of technology.
Thank you. I think this was a question that I had, but I feel like we kind of really delve pretty deeply into it. Is how families can protect moments of real connection while still using the screens when they're needed or helpful. Do you have further thoughts on that?
So we talked about the routines. We talked about it sounds funny, but protecting moments of boredom, shared quiet, opportunities where a child can experience frustration and work through that. Having really thinking about, are we engaging in even small moments of child-led interaction? Am I really making an effort to do something that my kid is passionate about and, like, you know, pay attention to the, because throughout the day, you hear about 1,000, "Mommy, watch this." And, of course, can't watch all the time, but is there a part of the day where I'm just saying, "Okay, nothing else is more important. This is the time I'm blocking for whatever it is you wanna do, whatever it is you wanna show me, whatever it is you wanna create, let's go do it." And even 10 minutes every day makes a difference. So I think it requires taking a bit of an audit of your time, really thinking about, what does your schedule at home look like? What am I doing? What's lacking? How do I need to shift things around to make sure that even that a small amount of time is happening on a daily basis?
Yeah, I think that kind of goes back to I love that you said, like, self-auditing, 'cause I'm thinking of it as, holding yourself accountable as the person in charge of, what's an appropriate way to spend time and how are we spending our time. So, kind of auditing with grace, I think is definitely key. You wanna do it with grace so that you don't, end up shaming yourself, but, yeah, I really think you nailed it with taking a look at your day and how you're spending your time and kind of preparing in advance.
Right. Absolutely. There are external factors that impact us. Yes. And we are curating their world. As their caregivers, whether it's in the classroom or at home, we curate their whole world. So we hold a lot of power and treat ourselves with grace, absolutely, and make plans to create the world that we want our kids to live in.
I love that. So, with all of this being said, how can parents respond early if something feels off so that learning or confidence challenges don't grow quietly?
Make a plan. So when you see, for me, it was noticing that really my child didn't want to do independent play, that independent play had become challenging, that I was constantly being called over, that not getting something right with the Legos became explosive frustration and so devastating, and so crushing. For me, that was a huge signal that, okay, this is something that you need to be spending more time with, less screen time. I noticed basically that my son needed just a higher tolerance for independent play. For me, that was huge, huge, huge signal. So that's when you go into planning mode. And the impulse for me was, I need to make a drastic change. I need to completely cut screen time. Maybe I even need to, like, penalize behaviors. But what actually worked was, over the course of several weeks, cutting down screen time, engaging in independent play with him just to get him started. So we get the Legos out, we set everything up, have the instructions, have the pieces that he's going to need readily available, separate the pieces that are not needed right now, get him started on it, maybe stay there about 10 minutes, back away and do what I need to do. And what I saw was the amount of time he was able to play independently steadily grew. His ability to tolerate the struggle, even just with fine motor skills of being able to take apart the pieces, put them together, that frustration became manageable. Um, and I saw joy in my kid. So, but it took time, it took planning, it took an audit of how are we spending our time when we're at home, and it took grace too, because that mom guilt it's so real. And when you notice that there is an imbalance, the impulse can be just to feel such shame and to feel such guilt. But this is something that we all experience, and that's just when you plan and you shift the direction of things. Another thing that has been hugely helpful is chores. Chores fill so much time. So rather than having my son watching something, I fill time at home with chores, and it's building his self-esteem. He sees that, "Oh, I can do this all by myself," and he feels great about himself. that's another thing that I don't have to do. So now I can actually have time to play a game with you at the end of the night because some of my load has been taken off. So chores have been amazing for me in lowering screen time.
Jennie, I think that that's so incredible that you know, not only recognized that you were seeing some of these behaviors, but then were able to find ways to structure the coming out of it. I think that's the hardest part. I think even as adults, we've gotten a little bit used to that instant gratification and just knowing that it's a process and it's a journey and it's going to take time and there it might be a little bit forward, a little bit backward, a little bit forward and a little bit backward for a while, but that there is that kind of like light at the end of the tunnel, I think is so important. I think that's so incredible. And I think it's funny too that you brought up chores because they're so important and they're such important life skills. And it amuses me so much sometimes talking to my students about what chores they do. Some of them don't do any chores. And then a lot of them that do chores, they have their favorite chores. And that always makes me like chuckle a little bit like, oh yeah, I really love to vacuum because, and a lot of them, it's like, oh, I earn screen time for this, right? Like if I do this chore, then I get to have 5 minutes more on the screen or whatever. And it's like kind of this like push and pull and exchange between real life and screen time.
Absolutely. And, I love that you mentioned in your the students that you notice do chores. So it's such a flex. At least in the younger grades, it's like such a cool thing because a lot of kids don't do chores anymore. So that's I think a whole nother conversation, but it's a source of pride for them, actually.
It is.
And it might be a struggle at home. And I think that as teachers, we see a different side of it because there might have been a lot of dragging their feet at home when it came to actually doing that chore. But at least in the younger grades, first, second, third grade, it's cool because not everyone does it and it makes them feel like a grown up and it's something they get to brag about at school. And I have noticed that some of those kids that talk about doing chores, they also talk about how they've been an asset to their family, how they've been kind to their parent by taking up that work. And I have noticed that those kids tend to be very empathetic. So I'm just a huge fan of chores. So I think it's just a great thing for kids to do. And it's helpful to us as the adults.
Yeah, I love that. Going back to you noticing a change, I think that's probably one of the harder things to recognize. So I do want to say too, like, I don't think it's ever too late to start the process of change. Like when you see a behavior pattern, I don't think I mean, yes, it does. Obviously, you want to catch things as early as possible. But I think whenever you notice that pattern, is the time to start planning to make the changes. And I think it's great that you talked about planning for your children. I do think there's also something to be said to even discussing it like explicitly. Obviously, that's going to look different at different stages of development, but even just kind of going back to that like modeling behavior and our voices for young children become their inner voices as they grow and mature and their brains develop. So I think it's key to kind of give them language and, maybe say something like, I noticed you seemed really unhappy for a while after you spent the whole afternoon on your iPad. Sometimes I get really cranky if I don't get enough exercise. And, what do you think we could do next time to make a change? What do you think your body's telling you when you're feeling like this? And even just having those exchanges with your children and kind of like helping to develop their metacognition where they can start to recognize those behaviors and patterns also and say, oh, I think my body's telling me something's not feeling right.
Absolutely. I love that. I think probably every parent gets to this point at some time in their child's journey, maybe multiple times. Every parent gets to a point where you look back on what you're doing and you realize, I need to make a shift, and that will happen time and time again. Do we shame ourselves for it? Does our child see us shame ourselves for it and learn that that's how they should treat themselves? Or do we use this as an opportunity, like you so beautifully explained, to show them how to assess a situation? How do I assess my own behavior? How do I assess cause and effect? And then how do I pivot So it's an opportunity. If you're hearing this and you're like, yeah, I'm here, that's a learning opportunity. And it's okay. And we've all been there and we will all be there again.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I don't know. I think for me, kind of the takeaway is that screens aren't the problem themselves. They're not like inherently bad. And what matters is whether they're replacing our real connection and conversation. That we're still giving kids uh, our emotional presence, and that we're having kind of these like shared experiences with them where they can learn and communicate and build confidence through, planning and kind of, those self check-ins, those self audits.
Absolutely. And yeah, just like you said, screens have a place and there's no hard and fast rules. It's just, is this working in my house? Is this working for my family? Or am I seeing things that I don't like and that I want to change? And if you want to change it, like Erin said, it's never too late, you know? And it's actually an opportunity for growth and for great modeling.
And it can be done. You've
Yes,
proved that, right?
it
It's a hard
can.
process,
It
but it can be
can.
done.
And it might feel worse. The problem might seem like it's getting worse before it gets better, but the mess is like, this is child rearing. It's messy. At times it's ugly. It can be loud, but it gets better. You get through the hard times, but there's no way but through it.
That's awesome. I love that. Jennie, thank you so much for spending time today. And thank you all for spending time with us on the Willow Kids podcast. If today's conversation sparked a new idea, gave you reassurance, or simply made you pause and reflect, we'd love for you to carry that into your week and into the lives of the children you support. You can learn more about Willow Kids' upcoming programs and our growing community by visiting us online. And if you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing or sharing it with someone who cares deeply about education and childhood growth. Until next time, keep nurturing curiosity, keep asking thoughtful questions, and remember, strong roots grow lifelong learners.